I was 8 months pregnant when I walked into family court to finalize my divorce. I expected arguments. I expected lies. I expected Harrison to try one last time to take everything from me. I never expected his mistress to slap me in front of an entire courtroom. The crack echoed through the room, not the exaggerated kind you hear in movies, a real slap. Heavy, sharp. Sharp, the kind that makes every conversation stop in an instant. My cheek caught fire. The taste of blood spread across my tongue. Before I even realized what had happened, both hands dropped to my stomach, protecting my baby. I stood there, 34 weeks pregnant, alone, with a split lip in front of the bailiff, the court reporter, two clerks, and Judge Michael Carter of the San Bernardino County Family Court. Then I heard Harrison. He looked at Vanessa, the woman who had just struck his pregnant wife, and let out a quiet laugh. Not loud enough for anyone to call him out, just a small, satisfied breath, like they were sharing a private joke. That laugh changed something inside me. The slap hurt. His laugh ended 6 years of fear. Because in that moment, I understood something I should have realized long ago. This man would never stop hurting me, unless someone finally stopped him. To understand how we ended up there, I have to go back 6 years. The beginning wasn't dramatic. It almost never is. I was 27 when I met Harrison Cole at a charity fundraiser my mother insisted I attend. She owned Ashford Properties, a respected regional real estate company my grandfather had started decades earlier. It wasn't one of those billion-dollar corporations people write magazine covers about. It owned apartment buildings across Southern California, several office properties, and a handful of shopping centers. Stable, profitable, the kind of business that quietly survives for generations. Mom wanted me to meet people. I wanted to stay home with takeout and bad television. Harrison was 42, confident, polished, the sort of man who always sounded certain of himself. He was CEO of Cole Strategic Partners, sat on multiple nonprofit boards, and had recently been featured in a business magazine for what journalists called his private generosity. Looking back, I realize how much he loved that description. Private, quiet, controlled. Everything good he did had to be noticed for being unnoticed. At 27, I mistook that performance for character. We dated for 9 months. He remembered birthdays, opened doors, sent flowers to my office. When my mother began having health problems, he became even more attentive. He knew exactly how to become indispensable. We married in Sonoma with 75 guests surrounded by vineyards and white roses. My mother smiled through the entire ceremony. She even danced that evening, although she was already getting weaker. The warning signs had been there from the beginning. I just didn't know how to read them. Harrison gently suggested that I stop helping with Ashford Properties. "You've spent your whole life carrying your family's business," he would say. "Let professionals handle it for a while." He introduced me to an experienced financial advisor named Leonard. I trusted him because Harrison trusted him. Years later, I would discover Leonard had been working for Harrison all along. 18 months into our marriage, my mother suffered a massive stroke. She survived just long enough to spend 12 days in hospice. Grief hollowed me out. I barely slept, barely ate. People handed me paperwork every day. Insurance forms, estate documents, tax records. I signed everything Harrison placed in front of me. I believed I was completing probate paperwork. I wasn't. I simply had no idea what I was actually signing. I wouldn't discover the truth for another 4 years. The first moment I realized something was truly wrong happened 14 months ago. Not emotionally wrong. Not my husband has become distant wrong. Legally wrong. I was 5 months pregnant with our daughter. She had just started kicking hard enough for me to feel it every evening. I needed to update the beneficiary information on one of our insurance policies. Leonard had recently retired, so Harrison had hired another financial firm. I called to request a few documents. The woman on the phone apologized politely. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cole, but you're not listed as an authorized contact." I laughed. "There has to be a mistake. I'm Harrison's wife." "Yes, ma'am. But the authorized individuals listed on these accounts are Mr. Harrison Cole and Miss Emily Parker." Emily, the woman who, as I would soon learn, had been sleeping with my husband. At first, I convinced myself it had to be a clerical error. I repeated that lie to myself for almost 3 weeks. Then I found the hotel receipts. They weren't hidden. They weren't even folded inside a drawer. They sat inside Harrison's laptop case. 2 nights at a luxury resort in Monterey. The dates matched a business conference he had supposedly attended alone. The reservation listed both of their names. I sat on the bathroom floor for nearly an hour. My daughter kicked twice. Then everything became still. I didn't confront Harrison. People always ask why. The answer is simple. I was pregnant, financially dependent on a man whose name controlled nearly everything I believed we owned together. And I had just learned that the woman sleeping with my husband had more authority over our finances than I did. I called my college roommate, Megan. She had become a paralegal in Sacramento after graduation, and she didn't waste a single second trying to comfort me before giving advice. Document everything, she said. Don't move any money. And call a divorce attorney tomorrow morning. I did exactly that. The next morning, I met with Daniel Brooks. He had practiced family law for over 20 years. His office wasn't impressive. An old converted house with mismatched furniture, faded carpet, and a receptionist named Linda who carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who had watched hundreds of marriages fall apart. Daniel shook my hand, waited until I sat down, then adjusted his glasses. Before we begin, he said, there's something you need to know. Something in his expression made my stomach tighten. Your husband contacted my office last week. For a moment, I couldn't speak. He did what? He was asking about representation. Daniel folded his hands together. I believe he wasn't looking for legal advice. He was trying to prevent other attorneys from representing you. I stared at him. Can he actually do that? He tried. A faint smile crossed Daniel's face. But he failed. We completed a conflict check before your appointment this morning. You became my client first. He can't block us now. That was the moment I realized this wasn't simply an affair. Harrison had been preparing for this divorce long before I knew my marriage was over. He hadn't been reacting. He had been planning. Daniel immediately began requesting financial records. The investigation lasted nearly 2 months. It required a forensic accountant named Rebecca Collins, several subpoenas, dozens of corporate filings. When the results finally landed on Daniel's desk, I thought I was going to be sick. Ashford Properties, my mother's company, my grandfather's life's work, had been transferred into a Delaware shell corporation called Sterling Ashford Holdings, LLC. The sole managing member listed on every document was Harrison Cole. The transfer paperwork carried my signature. It was dated just 9 days after my mother's funeral. I stared at the document. That's not my signature. Daniel nodded. I know. He had already hired a handwriting expert. Dr. Melissa Grant had spent more than 20 years examining questioned documents. Her report was 12 pages long. Her conclusion appeared in bold letters. The signature is a traced forgery with an extremely high probability of fraud. He stole my mother's company. The words barely came out. Yes, Daniel answered. He didn't soften the truth. He didn't tell me everything would be okay. He simply looked at me and said, and we're going to get it back. Our hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in October. I was 34 weeks pregnant. My feet were swollen. My back hurt constantly. But none of that compared to the exhaustion that comes from living with fear every day. The night before the hearing, Daniel called me just before 10. I need you to stay calm and listen carefully. Something in his voice made my pulse race. Harrison's attorneys filed a motion just before midnight. What kind of motion? They're claiming their lead attorney has a scheduling conflict. So, what happens? The hearing stays on the calendar. But they've created enough confusion that I may not reach the courtroom before they're called. I felt my chest tighten. They're trying to separate you from your attorney. They're hoping to create procedural confusion. It's another delay tactic. I closed my eyes. Can we postpone? Daniel was silent for several seconds. Finally, he answered. If we delay this hearing, Harrison wins. He has already prepared witnesses ready to testify that you're emotionally unstable. He wants the court to believe you're an unfit mother before your daughter is even born. If you aren't there tomorrow, he controls the story. After we hung up, I lay awake until after 3 a.m. One hand rested on my stomach. My daughter rolled gently beneath my palm. I kept wondering what kind of world I was bringing her into. The next morning, I wore the only navy dress that still fit over my pregnancy. I put on my grandmother's pearl earrings. They had belonged to her for more than 40 years. I needed to feel like some part of my family was walking into that courtroom with me. I drove myself to the San Bernardino County Courthouse. Courtroom 9, 8:45 in the morning. Daniel's chair was empty. At 9 o'clock, Harrison walked in. He wasn't alone. 3 expensive attorneys followed behind him. Emily held his arm as if she already belonged there. She wore a cream-colored blazer and the confident smile of someone convinced the ending had already been written. Neither of them looked at me. They took their seats together. I sat alone. One legal folder, one pair of pearl earrings, 34 weeks pregnant, waiting. A few minutes before the judge entered, Harrison walked over to my table. His attorney stayed behind. He rested one hand on the back of my chair and leaned down slightly. It was a rehearsed performance. Everything Harrison did was calculated. Sign the settlement. His voice was almost gentle. He wore a charcoal suit, the same cologne he had worn on our wedding day. Walk away while you still have some dignity. I looked directly into his eyes. I'm asking for basic child support, my share of the marital assets, and medical coverage until our daughter is born. Nothing more. Behind him, Emily laughed quietly. Fairness? She said it loudly enough for the clerks to hear. You trapped a successful man with a pregnancy. And now you're talking about fairness? I slowly turned toward her. Don't talk about my daughter. Her smile disappeared instantly. I saw her shoulder move. I saw her arm rising. I saw exactly what she intended to do. I just couldn't move fast enough. Her palm hit my left cheek with full force. The sound exploded through the courtroom. Someone near the clerk's desk gasped. The bailiff immediately stepped forward. I tasted blood. My hands went to my stomach before they ever reached my face. My daughter moved beneath my palms. That was all I cared about. Then Harrison spoke. This, he said calmly, is exactly the instability I've been warning everyone about. For a second, I honestly wondered if I'd heard him correctly. I was standing there, 34 weeks pregnant, bleeding from my lip after his mistress had assaulted me in open court, and he was calling me unstable. I looked down at my trembling hands. Then I slowly raised my eyes toward the bench. Judge Michael Carter hadn't moved. He hadn't reached for his gavel. He hadn't looked at his notes. He simply stared at me. The expression on his face wasn't neutral anymore. It wasn't the detached expression judges usually wear while trying not to show emotion. It was something far colder, far heavier. He looked like a man who had just witnessed something he could never ignore. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, the judge turned toward the bailiff. Bailiff. His voice was calm, almost frighteningly calm. Seal the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors closed with a deep echo. Everything became silent. People often imagine justice feels exciting. It doesn't, at least not in the beginning. It feels like the entire atmosphere changes, like the pressure in the room shifts before a thunderstorm. Invisible, powerful, impossible to ignore. I watched Harrison. His confident smile disappeared for the first time that morning. His lead attorney leaned toward him and whispered something urgently. Then the judge looked directly at me. Sarah Elizabeth Carter Cole. I froze. So did Harrison. Elizabeth. My mother's family name. The name Harrison had slowly erased from my life. For 6 years he had introduced me simply as Sarah Cole, never Sarah Elizabeth Carter. Never mentioning the family that had built Ashford Properties. He always called it unnecessary. Old history. Too long. Too complicated. I had allowed it. Now I understood exactly why he wanted that name forgotten. Mr. Cole, Judge Carter said, are you aware of the emergency filing submitted to this court at 7:15 this morning? One of Harrison's attorneys immediately stood. Your Honor, my client's wife has demonstrated. I did not ask for your opinion. The judge never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Sit down. The attorney sat immediately. Harrison cleared his throat. I'm not aware of any emergency filing, Your Honor. We prepared for today's scheduled hearing. The judge opened a folder that hadn't been on his bench when court began. He adjusted his glasses, then he started reading. For 11 straight minutes. I counted every one of them because counting was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. He began with my medical records, prenatal records from my obstetrician, Dr. Laura Bennett. She had documented unusually high stress levels during 4 of my last 6 appointments. She had also recorded bruising on my upper left arm during my 30-week examination. I had told her I walked into a door frame. Her clinical notes read differently. Patient's explanation inconsistent with injury pattern, possible domestic abuse, continue monitoring. Next came our financial records. Rebecca Collins's forensic accounting report showed a systematic transfer of jointly held assets into accounts controlled by Sterling Ashford Holdings. The transfers had begun the day after my mother's funeral. Then came the corporate documents, the forged transfer agreement, the handwriting analysis. Dr. Melissa Grant's report concluded that the signature transferring ownership of Ashford Properties had an overwhelming probability of being forged. Then the judge read Daniel Brooks' affidavit. My attorney hadn't abandoned me. While Harrison's legal team scrambled the schedule, Daniel had been building something much larger, At 7:15 that morning, before the courthouse even opened, he had filed an emergency motion requesting immediate protection, an emergency asset freeze, a protective order, a fraud investigation, referral to the district attorney's financial crimes division. Every request was supported by evidence. When the judge finally lowered the papers, he removed his glasses and looked directly at Harrison. "Mr. Cole?" His voice remained perfectly calm. "Did you knowingly submit fraudulent documents transferring the plaintiff's inheritance into a shell corporation under your exclusive control?" Nobody moved. One of Harrison's attorneys grabbed his arm beneath the table. Too late. For the first time since I had known him, Harrison looked completely unprepared. He had spent his entire life controlling every room he entered. Now the room belonged to someone else. Emily's face had turned completely white. She kept glancing toward the courtroom doors as though she were calculating how quickly she could leave. The judge continued. "Digital evidence recovered from a previously archived cloud backup." I frowned. "Cloud backup?" Daniel had recovered my old phone, the one I thought had been permanently destroyed years earlier. A forensic specialist had restored thousands of deleted messages Harrison never knew still existed. The judge began reading them aloud. "She's at her prenatal appointment until noon. Go into the office. Remove every financial file before she gets home." Another message. "If she refuses to sign by the 14th, change the locks while she's at the doctor. I'll deal with the rest." My knees almost gave out. He had planned to lock me out of my own home while I was pregnant during a doctor's appointment. Judge Carter closed the file. "The evidence supports the plaintiff's sworn statement." He paused. "And it also supports several additional violations she has not yet alleged." At that exact moment, the courtroom doors opened. Daniel Brooks stepped inside looking as though he'd spent the last 3 hours fighting a war. Later, I would learn that wasn't far from the truth. His tie was crooked. A dark bruise had already formed along his jaw. His phone was gone. Someone had taken it from him in the courthouse parking garage. That wasn't an accident. Harrison's people knew exactly which garage Daniel used. Someone had been waiting for him. Daniel walked straight to my table without saying a word. He placed a thick folder in front of me and finally sat down. Only then did he look at my face. His eyes moved to the red mark across my cheek, then to the blood at the corner of my mouth. Something inside his expression became very still. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said quietly. I shook my head. "You're exactly on time." Judge Carter watched the exchange without interrupting. Then his attention shifted toward Emily Parker. She still sat beside Harrison, but all the confidence she'd walked into the courtroom with had disappeared. Her expensive cream blazer suddenly looked like a costume that no longer fit. "Miss Parker," the judge said, "you are not a party to these proceedings. You assaulted a protected individual inside this courtroom. You will remain in custody pending a contempt hearing. In addition, I am referring today's assault of a pregnant woman to the district attorney's office for criminal review." Emily opened her mouth. The judge raised one hand. "I strongly advise you not to say another word." She closed it immediately. The room felt completely different now. Only minutes earlier, Harrison had controlled everything. Now every person in the courtroom seemed to be looking at him with entirely different eyes. Judge Carter began issuing rulings one after another. "Protective order granted. Effective immediately. It shall cover the plaintiff, her unborn child, and her primary residence." He turned another page. "The marital residence shall remain under the plaintiff's exclusive possession pending final disposition of this matter. Harrison Cole is ordered to vacate the property no later than 5 o'clock this evening." Another page. "The plaintiff's medical insurance was improperly terminated during the 8th month of pregnancy." He looked directly at Harrison. "You will restore full coverage within 24 hours. The intentional cancellation of prenatal medical insurance may constitute additional criminal liability." No one at Harrison's table objected. Judge Carter continued. "All accounts associated with assets identified in the forensic accounting report are hereby frozen pending investigation. Ashford Properties shall be placed under temporary receivership until ownership is formally restored." My claim to the company was officially entered into the record. For the first time in years, someone with authority had acknowledged that it had always belonged to my family. Harrison's attorneys finally found their voices, one objection after another. Procedural objections, jurisdictional objections, evidentiary objections. Every single one was denied. Harrison himself stood twice to protest. Twice he was overruled before finishing his sentence. By the third ruling, even his lead attorney understood the courtroom had turned against them. Experienced lawyers recognize those moments. There is no strategy that fixes them. Then Harrison made the biggest mistake of the entire hearing. He leaned toward me across the table. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You'll regret this. I promise you, you'll regret every second of it." Before I could answer, Mr. Cole, the judge's voice cut across the courtroom. "You have just threatened a protected individual. Inside my courtroom, in front of this bench, while these proceedings are being transcribed." Harrison slowly looked up. Judge Carter's expression never changed. "Mrs. Cole is not merely your wife. She is a citizen protected by the laws of this state, a patient under active prenatal medical care, and an individual currently under the direct protection of this court. You will not address her again." Do you understand me? For the first time in 6 years, Harrison had nothing to say. He simply nodded. Judge Carter picked up his gavel. "This hearing is adjourned." The sound echoed through the courtroom. I stood slowly. At 34 weeks pregnant, standing too quickly wasn't an option anymore. My legs trembled beneath me. Not because I was frightened, because my body had finally realized the danger was over. Daniel gently steadied my arm. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Across the room, Harrison was arguing with his attorneys. At least he was trying to. His lead counsel had just been handed another document by one of the junior associates. He read the first page. His expression changed instantly, like someone who had stepped into traffic without seeing the truck. Harrison snatched the document from him. He began reading. The color drained from his face. His hands, the same steady hands that had signed contracts, closed million-dollar deals, shaken hands with investors, never seemed to shake, were trembling. He looked at me. For the first time since I had met him, I saw genuine fear, not fear of embarrassment, not fear of losing money, fear of me. Fear of everything I had quietly built while he believed I was too broken to fight back. He stared at the papers. "What is this?" he whispered. I looked at him for a long moment. I wish I could tell you I felt victorious, that I felt satisfied, that revenge filled every part of me. The truth is much quieter. I was simply tired. Tired of 6 years of lies. Tired of grieving my mother. Tired of carrying our daughter while wondering whether she would grow up watching the same kind of man. Tired of doubting myself. I looked down at the folder in my hands, then back at Harrison. It's the corrected record. The real version of everything. I picked up my file, adjusted my grandmother's pearl earrings, and walked out of courtroom 9, behind me. Harrison Cole remained standing with the evidence of every crime he had committed resting in his trembling hands. I should tell you what that document was. You deserve to know. During the 2 months leading up to the hearing, Daniel's investigative team uncovered something Harrison never imagined anyone would find. They found Leonard, the retired financial advisor, the man Harrison had trusted to manage nearly every document connected to my mother's estate. Leonard was 64 by then, living quietly outside Phoenix, and carrying a secret that had been eating at him for years. When Daniel's investigator finally met with him, he laid everything out. Forgery, corporate fraud, conspiracy, accessory liability, federal exposure. Leonard listened without interrupting. Then he made a decision. Protecting Harrison Cole wasn't worth spending the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, so he told the truth. Not just verbally. He had kept records, real records, copies Harrison never knew existed, parallel files documenting every transfer, every instruction, every wire, every signature, every conversation surrounding my mother's estate. When the investigator asked him why he had kept everything, Leonard gave an answer I don't think I'll ever forget. "I always knew I'd need an exit plan. I just hoped I'd never have to use it." The document Harrison held in that courtroom was Leonard's sworn affidavit, 43 pages, signed, notarized, supported by attachments. It described everything: the forged transfer, the shell corporation, the timeline, the money, the instructions Harrison had given him while I was still grieving my mother's death. One email, sent only 3 days after my mother's funeral, became the centerpiece of the entire investigation. It contained a single sentence: "She won't read anything carefully for at least a month. Move everything now." Those 11 words destroyed Harrison's defense. That email later became one of the primary exhibits in the district attorney's case. 14 weeks after the hearing, Harrison Cole was formally charged. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. After months of negotiations, he accepted a plea agreement on 2 felony counts. He received a suspended prison sentence, 3 years of supervised probation, heavy financial penalties, and a permanent order preventing him from serving as an officer, director, trustee, or fiduciary of any corporation for the next 7 years. Ashford Properties was returned to me. Every apartment building, every commercial lease, every asset my grandfather had spent decades building, every document once again carried my family's name. Emily Parker pleaded guilty to misdemeanor battery. She received community service, probation, and substantial fines. By court order, Harrison was required to reimburse every dollar of my legal expenses. Daniel's fees, Rebecca Collins' forensic accounting work, Dr. Melissa Grant's handwriting analysis, every expert, every investigation, every hour. His lead attorney later sent Daniel a short professional email. He wrote that he had never been informed of the full extent of Harrison's actions. He withdrew from representing him immediately. 6 weeks after the hearing, my daughter was born. On a Wednesday morning, I named her Charlotte, after my grandmother, the woman who used to drive me past Ashford Properties buildings when I was little and proudly tell me, one day this will still be here because our family built it the right way. And after my mother, who danced at my wedding, but never lived long enough to see justice finally arrive. Charlotte Elizabeth Carter Cole. Every name, every piece of my family, exactly as it should have been. She weighed 8 pounds and 3 ounces. When they placed her in my arms, she looked at me with that strange, ancient expression newborn babies have, as though they'd arrived from somewhere beyond understanding, and were quietly deciding whether this new world could be trusted. Megan was there. Daniel sent flowers. Doctor. Laura Bennett stopped by during a break between patients. She had been the doctor who quietly wrote possible domestic abuse in my medical chart when I couldn't admit the truth. She had carefully preserved every record Daniel later requested. She held Charlotte for several minutes. I watched her smiling at my daughter, and I realized something. Justice isn't one dramatic courtroom speech. It isn't a judge striking a gavel. It isn't one perfect moment. Justice is built from hundreds of small decisions made by ordinary people who choose not to look away. A doctor who writes careful notes, an investigator who keeps digging, an attorney who refuses to quit, a frightened accountant who finally tells the truth. 8 months have passed since Charlotte was born. She's learning to sit on her own now. She loves bananas. She's completely attached to a stuffed rabbit she insists on dragging everywhere. I spend several days each week at Ashford Properties. We're renovating our oldest buildings, replacing windows, modernizing apartments, making the kinds of improvements that cost money today but will still matter 30 years from now. My grandfather would have loved every minute of it. My mother would have covered my desk with spreadsheets before approving every expense anyway. I still miss both of them every single day. The last I heard, Harrison was working as a consultant for a private investment company in Los Angeles. I don't follow his life anymore. I don't need to. Sometimes people like him still find soft places to land. The world isn't always perfectly fair, but Ashford Properties is mine again. My daughter is safe. My family's name belongs to us again. Everything Harrison stole, he lost. And the last image I have of him isn't from our wedding. It isn't from happier days. It's the image of him standing in that courtroom, holding 43 pages of truth and shaking hands, finally realizing that the woman he believed he had broken had been quietly rebuilding herself all along.